What's going on, guys? Mr. Collins here, bringing you another episode of the podcast, Let's Talk History. This time, though, we got Season 2. So we're back at it again in another season, a new school year, and on top of all that, some new faces. So to my right, you'll meet Mr. Dalton. He's a new face here at KCMS. I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself.
So, hey, I'm Mr. Dalton. This is my second year teaching, so I teach 7th grade. Social studies like you, so I'm your counterpart.
Yep.
Like I said, that's my second year teaching. Last year I taught at Lincoln County Middle School. Shout out to my students that may be watching this podcast from up there. Love you, miss you guys. Moved down here in April of last year, back to Corbin and stuff. Always loved southeastern Kentucky. My dad's side of the family is from East Tennessee, just across the tunnel from us and stuff. So this area's always felt like home. And we're almost through the first week of school, and honestly, I could say I made a great decision coming to Knox County and stuff. Everybody's been great. The kids have been great. Overall, it's been a good move and stuff. I'm originally from southeastern Kentucky. So I'm from the Lake Cumberland area, Russell Springs, to be more exact. But I met my wife a few years ago. She's from Corbin and stuff, and we decided, like I said, to move back in April and stuff, and here I am.
There he is. So, what better way to start off Season 2, Episode 1, and a new co-host than to talk about some darkness that spread over Europe in the 14th century that killed a lot of people.
I love it.
I can't think of a better way, honestly. So we've actually toyed with the idea of doing a Black Plague episode for a while, but I wanted to save it just for the perfect time, and I think you're looking at it right now. I can't think of a better way to start off another season. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So
sounds good to me.
The origin of the Black Plague. It's kind of shaky on the information there. Nobody really knows. I mean, tracking down the rat that kind of started it all, it's almost impossible.
Right.
But before the podcast started, me and Mr. Dalton here were kind of talking, and he kind of had some insight into, I don't want to say a conspiracy theory, but a theory that could maybe be leading to how it all started.
So, you know how, like, late night, so I'm a big TikTok guy and stuff. So, you know how, like, you're scrolling through TikTok at night? Well, it so happened this summer, I'm looking at this video of, talking about the Black Death and stuff. And it talks about the Mermont. And so I'm like, what in the world's that? And basically what it is, it looks like what we would think a groundhog would look like. And sure enough, people think that the Black Plague is, that was back in the Middle Ages. That's not a thing anymore. But I think a lot of people don't realize is it's still around.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's still around. We have vaccines for it and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And sadly enough, there are still about 5 to 20 people a year that pass away in Mongolia from the Black Plague because of this Mermont. So I saw this on TikTok, and I'm like, this can't be true. And sure enough, I got looking into it, and it is. So this is a animal that, for lack of intensive purposes, has religious and ceremonial effects to the Mongolian people.
Okay.
So they hunt this animal, they kill it, and they eat the kidneys of this animal. Like, it's a particular dish that they have like once a year. And sure enough, there's like 5 people a year that kind of die from this because these rats are fully infested with the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
And so, obviously they eat it, they get it and stuff. 90% of the time, what I've seen is kind of the reason, kind of what we think or what we teach in class of how the plague started, how it started to spread and stuff. And it's, people getting bit by the fleas that these Mermonts are carrying. But overall, the majority of time, because these animals kind of live underground, kind of like what we think a groundhog would. Oh, yeah. But it's legit people cooking this up in a dish and eating this stuff. It blew my mind.
Yeah, that is interesting. And not to, keep on the track of debunking myths, but, one myth is that it doesn't exist anymore. It was eradicated, after the 14th century. Obviously that is false. There are still some symptoms of Black Plague around the world, specifically in Mongolia, which I didn't know. That's interesting. But another one is that the 14th century rendition of the plague was it. But that's not true, because the plague has actually existed for thousands of years.
Right.
I'm pretty sure ancient Chinese proverbs talk about the plague. I know for a fact that part of Rome's demise in the beginning of the Middle Ages was the plague. Mm-hmm. And I just find it interesting that this part right here that we're about to talk about is almost the most interesting to most viewers. This is the one everybody wants to talk about because everybody's got a little darkness inside of them.
Right.
This is probably the worst rendition of the plague that's ever happened. Hopefully that ever happens. I feel like now that's true because we have modern medicine.
Right.
We can take care of this stuff. And in this topic, we're going to talk a little bit about how the lack of modern medicine really hurts some people.
Right.
So I guess starting at the genesis of all of it, most scholars agree that the plague started in Asia, this rendition of it. The whole time we're referencing the plague, it's going to be the Middle Ages. Specifically 1347 was the year it began. So every time we mention the plague, just remember that's the one we're talking about.
Right.
So scholars believe that it actually started off in Asia, probably due to some of what Mr. Dalton here just explained. And, this is during the time of the Silk Road. And that's something we talk about a lot in class. And this is a road. It's not one big road that's a, myth, but this is just a huge trade route that linked Asia and Europe. This was a land trade route. This was a water trade route. This was just a route between Asia and Europe. And one day in October 1347, a ship returns from Asia to a Sicilian harbor, and it's, lost to history what that ship was carrying, some sort of cargo for, the Sicilians. And along with that cargo and the people that were coming off the ship, some rats with some fleas came off the ship as well. And
fleas on rats.
Exactly. You're really starting to just get a recipe for disaster here. Right. Because in this era of history, it didn't get the name the Black Ages or the Dark Ages for nothing.
Right.
I mean, it really had to earn that nickname. Mm-hmm. And you're about to understand why that was. So these rats jump off the ship, right?
Right.
They start infecting, because fleas, they multiply like rabbits. I mean, they go everywhere. They start infecting dogs, and they start infecting humans. And it gets to the point where people start coming down with this illness where their body is just full of aches, and they're starting to get these huge black boils all over their arms, and which gave it its name, the Black Death or the Black Plague. So we start getting a little recipe for disaster almost there.
Right. And it's like you put on the video for the promo. I think that was great for the episode of The Office. Everybody's freaking out, everybody's starting to panic. What the heck's going on? Stay calm.
Yep.
And they don't know who to turn to. And a lot of people think that it's God's wrath falling upon them. It's the punishment they deserve, which, kind of can go off. We could talk about that for 100%. Hours. And, I think a lot of it just basically boils down to people just, like you said, had a lack of knowledge of how to treat illnesses back in those days, which we talk about in class a lot too, that there's a lot of knowledge after the fall of Rome that's lost to kind of Western Europe, which is, primarily the area that we're talking about. A lot of that knowledge goes to what was then known the Eastern Roman Empire, what continues to go to be the Byzantine Empire.
Which is another reason why it's called the Dark Ages.
Right.
Because not only was it just a bad time to live, but we don't know a lot about what happened.
So just basic fundamental truths that we know of, like, it was the thing that we got with COVID. Stay 6 feet away from each other, wash hands, all that stuff. It's just kind of
people back then didn't understand that.
Right.
Too, and I feel like that kind of goes with why it's spread so bad.
Right.
Because people don't understand that there are these things that exist called germs.
Right.
You got to take yourself out of your 2023 brain and put yourself in your 14th century brain. We didn't understand germs. We didn't have aspirin. We didn't have, modern doctors like we have today. Right. Back then, and of course there was plague doctors with the huge noses, and we'll talk in a second why that was.
Right.
But there were all kinds of treatments for the plague. Just a warning, by the way, because this, might get a little graphic.
Oh, yeah.
But I like to talk about this in class because the kids like to hear about this. Lance boiling was one of the ways that doctors back then tried to treat the plague. They would take a metal stick and they would heat it up as hot as it could get it. It'd literally be red hot. And you would have all these black boils because of the Black Death. And they would just stick it in one of the boils and just boil the boil.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, you went into shock and you died.
Right.
And they're like, well, you can't say the plague killed him.
Right.
I guess I kind of killed him.
Right.
So lance boiling, that's one way.
Bloodletting's a big one too.
Can't miss that one.
And that's probably the main one. That's why your plague doctors always wore black. That's why your nurses and medical professionals, like if you're having surgery, will wear white now, because they wore black basically just to cover up the amount of blood that was on them, which is a crazy thing to think of. And it's crazy that bloodletting was a common practice all the way up into the 1800s. Actually, that's how George Washington passed away.
Yeah.
So it's this belief that the reason why you're sick is there's this imbalance in your system. There's an imbalance of your body fluid in your system. I think it was
blood, phlegm, and mucus is what doctors back then believed you should have.
Right.
Like a good balance of.
So they're wanting to get all this like bad bile out of you. So basically what they done, they would come in and they would take a scalpel and make a large incision, and you would just sit there and bleed, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Until they got a certain amount out that they thought that you was going to get cured, but sadly we know that your blood carries your oxygen.
Yep.
It's a vital part of what keeps you going as a human being, and the less blood you have, the less likely you're going to have to live. So that's another way that doctors just unknowingly killed people.
Yeah, by bloodletting, you're not able to fight the infection.
Right.
I mean, you got to have that blood to fight the infection that's inside your body at the time. So when the plague first happens, symptoms didn't show up until like a week later.
Right.
So you could be infected by the plague, have it, carry it, spread it, and you wouldn't even feel bad. Like you would be just normal. But by the time the symptoms hit you, it was almost too late.
Right.
So a lot of times, people would get the plague. They would go to all church specifically because that was mandatory during the Middle Ages. You had to go to church.
Right.
Shout out to the Catholic Church. And
my brother-in-law might not like that, but okay.
Yeah. So, and I'm referencing obviously the old Catholic Church. It's hard not to be rude towards the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages because they did some pretty corrupt stuff back then, for sure.
They definitely wasn't thinking straight for certain.
No, but it got to the point where all these people were just getting infected left and right, and they had no idea what took over them. Kind of like Mr. Dalton said, it was thought to be God's wrath that was poured upon them. Doctors would wear these huge suits with, like he said, leather all over them, these huge noses, because they would stuff spices inside the noses of the plague suits, thinking, well, if I smell cinnamon, I'm not going to get sick. Again, this is what people thought of medicine back then.
Right.
We didn't have a common grip of medicine.
Well, there would even be people that would, what few cities had sewer systems.
Yeah.
There would be people that would hide in sewers simply thinking that, well, if I'm just surrounded by bad smells, that the sickness is going to flee from me.
Yep.
It's not going to enter an area where it's going to be stinky.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of going back to the Catholic Church, you've got a Europe basically on fire with plague right now.
Right.
The Catholic Church is saying, well, if you would have prayed harder, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And this starts to give almost like a distrust with the Catholic Church. People up until this point followed it, religiously, no pun intended.
Well, and not to cut you off, but
No.
Pope Gregory, he's in 1233, he issues this edict. He becomes Pope in 1233, and he issues this edict called Vox Dogmata. And basically, it's his way of trying to ban a lot of heretical practices in Europe. One of them being the worship of idol gods. So there's this group reported in Germany that had this weird practice, and their idol was basically a black cat.
Yeah.
Now, the edict does not say, hey, let's go out and kill all the cats. Let's kill all the black cats. But it is a historical fact that Gregory didn't like cats.
Yeah.
Thought they were weird and superstition. Thought that people, they embodied the devil. That was his literal belief. But in the edict, it doesn't say, hey, you need to go take care of these cats. But there became such a hysteria around it because the Pope was like, this is horrible. These cats embody the devil. People literally believed that and went out and kind of started hunting these cats down.
Yep.
So you automatically, like we said, we talked about the rats that come in off the boat in 1343 and the fleas that come in, and that's originally how it starts affecting. Eventually the disease becomes airborne and people start transmitting it by just close contact with one another. But you take a natural predator out of there to get these rats out of the way. So you've just got more of a rat infestation, more fleas. So it's literally the perfect storm for millions of people to die.
It's literally a cesspool of just terribleness.
Right.
So the plague just rampages through Europe. People start calling it a wrath of God, saying, well, maybe if we prayed harder, this wouldn't have happened. On top of all this, you've got indulgences with the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. The church is saying, well, you can pay your way into heaven so your family members can, go to heaven. They're stuck in purgatory, so you got to get them out. And that's a whole nother podcast right there.
Right.
But
you got priests that are getting married, having illegitimate children.
Yep.
Even one of the popes had several illegitimate children and several mistresses, which, again, another podcast. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you got just this terrible storm happening. The numbers are kind of skewed because literally there wasn't many historians around back then because they died from the plague. Literally. Some say somewhere between 30% on the more, practical end to almost 60% of Europe was just wiped out.
And just to kind of give you some rough numbers, looking at this, Wikipedia says it's somewhere between 75 and 200 million people.
Yeah.
And now that's worldwide and stuff, but really in Europe, you're looking at closer to that 50 million mark.
100%.
Yeah.
Most people at this time lived in Europe. Europe was pretty, it was vibing at the time.
Right. Europe's about the size of Texas. So you think about if, 50 million people is 60% of the population, you've got what, 120,000 people living in Europe. Or 120 million people living
Math
in
is
Europe.
hard.
Yeah, I'm not a math teacher by any means.
No, me neither.
Yeah, my math's not mathing.
I don't even know what numbers are.
No. What's that? But no, you think about it. You've got 120 million people living in the size of the state of Texas. There's people all over each other. There's reports of, the way they dealt with the plague was, you were on, they did start implementing quarantines and stuff, but if it was bad enough, there's so many people that died, they didn't know what to do with the bodies.
Yeah.
So they would literally, if a family, let's say there was a household of 10 that died, they would put them in the household and just set everything on fire.
Yep.
And that was the only way they could really eradicate the disease that was there. There's even reports of one of the popes blessing the Rhine River in France
Yeah.
as a cemetery, and you've got dead bodies floating in the river, people's drinking source, livestock's drinking source. And like I said, it's just this big giant cesspool because people didn't understand how all this stuff works.
Exactly. The lack of knowledge on medicine really hurt Europe at this time, which is why we go into a rebirth just a few hundred years later where people start worrying about medicine. You almost wonder, why that happens.
Right.
Well, now you know.
Right.
We're running a little short on time.
Yeah.
But we still have a whole lot to talk about.
Right.
So I guess that only means there has to be a part 2.
Sounds good to me.
So I'm Mr. Collins. This is
Mr.
Mr. Dalton. This was the Black Plague. Still got a lot more to talk about it. But as always, keep learning history and have a good one.
See y'all.